There was a season when the weight of debt felt suffocating. Every notification sounded like a threat. Every phone call carried tension. Bills weren't just pieces of paper. They felt like accusations. You're behind, you're late, you're not doing enough. The pressure wasn't only financial, it was emotional and spiritual. It tried to drain confidence and replace it with quiet fear. And fear has a voice. It whispers at night. It magnifies numbers. It paints worst-case scenarios. It tells you that you'll always struggle and that freedom is for someone else. What made it heavier was the constant repetition of negative words. Saying, "I'm broke," felt harmless at first. Saying, "I'll never catch up," sounded like honesty, but those words began shaping expectation, and expectation influences direction. When the mind is trained to expect lack, it unconsciously aligns with it. Thoughts become beliefs. Beliefs influence decisions. Decisions create outcomes. The cycle continues until something interrupts it. The interruption came with a realization: agreement determines outcome. Whatever you continually agree with gains strength in your life. If you agree with fear, it grows louder. If you agree with pressure, it tightens its grip. But if you choose to agree with promise instead of panic, something begins to shift internally before it shifts externally. The change doesn't start in the bank account. It starts in belief. Instead of rehearsing the size of the debt, I began rehearsing the greatness of God's provision. Instead of magnifying the bills, I magnified the promises. Words changed first. "I'm drowning" became "I am sustained." "There's not enough" became "supply is flowing." Speaking differently felt unnatural in the beginning because circumstances hadn't changed yet. But faith doesn't wait for evidence, it establishes evidence. It speaks ahead of manifestation. As those declarations continued, peace began replacing anxiety. The numbers were still there, but the panic wasn't. Calm thinking returned. Creativity surfaced. Ideas that were once buried under stress began to rise. Fear narrows vision, peace expands it. Under pressure, the mind freezes. Under faith, it functions. That inner shift was more powerful than any immediate financial result because it restored authority over emotion. Debt had seemed like a master, but it was only a condition. Conditions change. Masters demand obedience, but conditions respond to action. The moment authority was reclaimed internally, the situation no longer felt permanent. It felt temporary and subject to change. Confidence returned, not because money suddenly appeared, but because perspective did. Instead of feeling chased by bills, there was a sense of moving forward strategically. There was also a deeper understanding that provision is not limited to one channel. When stress dominates, it convinces you that your job is your only source. But when faith rises, it reminds you that opportunities, favor, wisdom, and creativity are also forms of provision. A calm mind recognizes solutions faster. A peaceful heart attracts healthier decisions. Small improvements began happening, discounts negotiated, unexpected assistance, new ideas for income, disciplined budgeting without resentment. None of it felt forced, it felt directed. The internal transformation became the foundation for external movement. Fear no longer dictated daily emotion. Instead of waking up worried, there was a quiet assurance that progress was happening even if it wasn't immediately visible. Words were no longer careless. They were intentional. Thoughts were guarded. Agreement shifted permanently away from lack and towards supply. And that shift marked the true beginning of freedom. You don't fight debt with panic. Panic feels active, but it is powerless. It creates motion without progress. It keeps the mind running in circles, replaying the same fears, exaggerating the same numbers, expecting the same negative outcomes. When panic takes control, it shortens vision. It makes tomorrow look darker than today. It pushes you into rushed decisions, emotional spending, avoidance, or even silence. Panic convinces you that pressure is permanent and that urgency must control you. But panic has never paid a bill. It has never created increase. It has only magnified the problem inside your thoughts. Anxiety operates the same way. It disguises itself as responsibility. It says, if you worry enough, Maybe something will change. But worry is not a strategy. Anxiety does not produce wisdom, it drains it. When the heart is anxious, clarity disappears. The mind becomes cloudy, simple solutions feel complicated, small challenges feel overwhelming. Anxiety turns a temporary setback into a lifelong sentence. It narrows creativity and blocks insight. It keeps you reacting instead of responding. Debt is not defeated by emotional reactions. It is confronted with disciplined faith. Faith is not pretending the numbers don't exist. Faith is choosing not to let the numbers dictate identity. It is refusing to let a financial condition define personal worth. Faith stands in the middle of visible lack and declares invisible supply. It refuses to surrender peace to pressure. It rejects the narrative that says, "This is how it will always be." Instead, it introduces a higher narrative, one built on promise, provision, and possibility. When you shift from panic to faith, your internal posture changes. You stop speaking from fear and start speaking from expectation. Words begin to carry confidence instead of desperation. Instead of saying, "I don't know how I'll survive," you begin saying, "Provision is working on my behalf." That shift may seem small, but it alters mental direction. The brain begins looking for solutions instead of rehearsing problems. Energy once wasted on worry becomes available for wisdom. Faith also slows you down in a powerful way. Panic rushes. Faith listens. Panic demands immediate escape. Faith seeks strategic movement. Under faith, you begin asking better questions. What can be adjusted? What can be negotiated? What skill can be developed? What opportunity can be pursued? Instead of shrinking under pressure, you begin to expand internally. Confidence rebuilds. Discipline strengthens. Hope stabilizes emotion. There is authority in calm conviction. When you refuse to let anxiety rule your atmosphere, you regain control over your choices. You stop making decisions to escape discomfort and start making decisions aligned with long-term freedom. Faith anchors you. It steadies your breathing. It clears your thinking. It protects your peace from external noise. Even if the balance hasn't changed yet, your posture has. You stand differently. You speak differently. You think differently. Panic reacts to what is seen. Faith responds to what is believed. Panic says, "This is too much." Faith says, panic sees closed doors. Faith anticipates new pathways. Panic magnifies obstacles. Faith magnifies possibility. One drains strength. The other restores it. One binds you emotionally. The other releases courage. One keeps you trapped in reaction. The other positions you for deliberate, empowered action. I discovered something powerful. Heaven responds to agreement. Agreement is more than words spoken casually. It is alignment of belief, expectation, and confession. What you consistently agree with begins shaping your internal world, and your internal world eventually influences your external outcomes. Agreement is a spiritual principle that operates whether you are aware of it or not. If you continually agree with thoughts of defeat, your emotions follow that direction. If you repeatedly affirm lack, your mindset adjusts to expect it. Agreement gives permission for something to take root. When fear speaks and you echo it, you strengthen it. When pressure suggests that you will never recover and you repeat that narrative, you authorize that expectation in your thinking. The mind is designed to move toward what it repeatedly hears. It searches for evidence to confirm the story you tell yourself. If the story is, "I will always struggle," your focus will unconsciously highlight every struggle while ignoring signs of progress. Agreement trains perception. But the principle works both ways. When you intentionally agree with promise instead of panic, something shifts beneath the surface. Even if circumstances remain unchanged at first, your alignment changes. You begin to echo truth instead of tension. Instead of saying, "Nothing is working," you declare, "Things are aligning for my good." Instead of rehearsing failure, you rehearse provision. That agreement starts shaping expectation. Expectation influences attitude. Attitude influences action. Heaven responds to confident alignment. Agreement is not begging. It is not pleading from a place of insecurity. It is standing firmly on what has already been spoken and saying, I choose to align with that. It is recognizing that promise carries greater authority than present pressure. When you agree with promise, you position yourself under its influence. Your heart becomes receptive instead of resistant. Your mind becomes open instead of closed. There is also power in consistency. One declaration mixed with 10 complaints creates confusion internally. Divided agreement produces unstable expectation. But when agreement becomes steady, clarity develops. You guard your words. You monitor your thoughts. You interrupt fear before it completes its sentence. You replace negative conclusions with intentional affirmations. Over time, this disciplined alignment strengthens confidence. Agreement also affects emotion. When you continually speak words of provision, gratitude begins to rise. Gratitude shifts focus from what is missing to what is available. It cultivates awareness of small victories. It builds momentum internally. Emotional stability increases because your foundation is no longer fluctuating with every financial update. Instead of reacting to every change, you remain anchored in a chosen truth. As agreement deepens, decisions improve. When you believe provision is possible, you make choices that reflect that belief. You pursue opportunities instead of avoiding them. You negotiate instead of assuming rejection. You learn instead of surrendering. Agreement fuels proactive behavior. It eliminates the passive posture of helplessness. There is authority in unified belief. When your thoughts, words, and expectations move in the same direction, internal conflict decreases. Doubt loses volume. Confidence grows stronger. You begin to sense alignment within yourself. Peace becomes more consistent. Fear may attempt to interrupt, but it no longer dominates the conversation inside your mind. Heaven responds to agreement because agreement reflects trust. Trust activates boldness. Boldness sustains perseverance. Perseverance produces visible change. What you choose to agree with today is quietly shaping the reality you will experience tomorrow, one day. Instead of saying, I'm drowning in debt, I made a deliberate decision to change my confession. It wasn't dramatic. There was no sudden sign in the sky. There was simply a quiet awareness that my words had been partnering with my problem instead of partnering with promise. I had been narrating lack with precision, describing every shortage, repeating every negative number, reinforcing every delay. My mouth had become an amplifier for fear. That realization alone created a turning point, so I chose different words. Not because the situation had improved, but because I understood that waiting for change before speaking change would keep me trapped in the same cycle. I said, Father, your word declares that you supply all my need according to your riches in glory. I agree with that. I receive that. I thank you that lack has no authority over my life. Speaking it felt unfamiliar at first. The bills were still present. The deadlines hadn't disappeared. But something inside resisted continuing the old pattern of defeat. At first, those declarations required discipline. My mind would attempt to argue back. It would say, look at the statements, look at the due dates. But faith is not blind to facts. It simply refuses to let facts have the final word. Every time doubt tried to interrupt, I returned to the declaration. I repeated it until it felt less like a script and more like a conviction. Repetition strengthened belief. Belief stabilized emotion. Gradually, my internal atmosphere shifted. The same environment that once felt heavy began to feel manageable. The same numbers that once produced panic now produced determination. Peace started replacing tension. Instead of obsessively checking accounts with anxiety, I reviewed them with clarity. I stopped reacting emotionally and started thinking strategically. The confession wasn't changing the numbers instantly, but it was changing me. As I continued declaring supply, gratitude began to rise. I noticed small provisions I had previously overlooked: a timely discount, an unexpected opportunity, a helpful conversation. When fear dominated, I had been blind to these moments. But when faith directed my attention, I recognized them as signs of movement. Gratitude reinforced confidence. Confidence strengthened expectation. The words "lack has no authority over my life" became especially powerful. Authority implies control, and I realized I had been surrendering control emotionally. By declaring that lack had no authority, I was reclaiming internal leadership. I was refusing to let a temporary financial condition dictate my peace or identity. That declaration produced boldness. It reminded me that circumstances are subject to change, but my position in faith remains steady. Over time, those daily affirmations built resilience. When new expenses appeared, I didn't collapse into discouragement. I returned to the same confession. When income fluctuated, I didn't panic. I reinforced the same truth. The consistency created stability. Stability produced clearer thinking. Clearer thinking resulted in wiser decisions. What began as intentional words eventually became a natural mindset. Instead of defaulting to fear, my instinct was to declare provision. Instead of rehearsing worst-case scenarios, I rehearsed promise. That steady alignment reshaped my perception, strengthened my confidence, and anchored my emotions in something greater than temporary financial pressure.